Good afternoon, and welcome to today's session. Today, we will be talking about the Information Architect's Playbook for Enterprise Information Management, or EIM. And today, I have with me my esteemed colleague, Mr. Andrew White. And we're going to be taking a walk through the EIM framework. And we're going to show how information architecture helps enable information management practices. We're going to show the symbiotic relationship between these two disciplines and how the information landscape is really a better together landscape. Now, the reason why this is so important is because information has become increasingly more important. Gartner has coined a term, the information of everything. And we've stated that for 2016, this is a key strategic trend for executives, for enterprise architects, for information managers to pay attention to. Now, what is the information of everything enabling? Well, it's enabling the blurring of the physical and the virtual. A great example of this would be companies like Macy's or Nordstrom's that are actually manipulating their physical brick and mortar retail shops based on what's happening in the virtual world. So as an example, Macy's is putting iBeacons throughout their stores so that they combine contextual data about you with their retail products in their store and help you navigate through their product line. Or if you're Nordstrom's, what they're doing is they're connecting with Facebook and Pinterest so that they can put on the shelf the most popular liked items and perhaps even the items you like and point you in that direction. So we're seeing very real impacts on the physical world and how our business models are changing. Now we see innovation coming from that direction, from the virtual to the physical, but also what's happening in the physical world and all the information generated from it, we're seeing new innovations occur as well. So as an example here, we see companies like Uber or Airbnb, which have zero capital. They have no assets that they have to manage. And yet they have all of our devices, which helps them build a better business model. What this is doing is it's redefining our industries. For the automotive industry, it's changing a century-old business model. And if companies like Tesla and Uber get their way, we may see transportation as a service. Believe it or not, here in the US, there was a study done. Our vehicles are only utilized 4 to 6% of the time. So 96% of the time, it's in a parking lot. Isn't that amazing? Now, what these companies are trying to do is they're trying to use the information that's generated from these vehicles to create new products and services. As an example, the Google autonomous vehicle will generate 1 terabyte per second. Now let's think about that for a second. What if we had every car on the road transmit 1 terabyte per second to a central server? That's a lot of data. Third, information is fueling smart technologies. How many of you have heard of the algorithmic business? A few of you. Our businesses are becoming more intelligent day after day. You may have heard our Vice President of Research say that data is dumb. Data largely is dumb. But when you put algorithms around it, it becomes smart. Now, these algorithmic computing solutions, you have to have viable information to make that solution successful. And lastly, we have devices that are generating information, transmitting information, and storing information all around us. We have more data than we've ever had in the history of humanity. And the question we have to ask our organizations is, are we any smarter?
So Mike describes a very exciting future, lots of opportunity, lots of innovation potential. However, we all are running a company. We're responsible for our organization's investments. We have initiatives in flight, maybe from the previous strategies, and we need to make change. We need to figure out what are we going to do differently to exploit this new future. So one of the things that we get to do, we get to look for patterns. We monitor what many organizations do. We see successful initiatives. We see organizations struggle. And we get to analyze what organizations do, and we therefore get the chance to publish toolkits and templates and breadcrumbs and things that you can use to help you get going and leverage the knowledge and experience from others that went before you. So as part of our research, we get to share, like this presentation, some of those toolkits and ideas to help you get started to figure out what you need to do next. What are the series of strategies you should put in place? What are the dependencies? What are the mines you need to sidestep to avoid a failure? What are the things you can do to get ahead faster? So that's really what the purpose of this particular presentation is all about. So the three key issues we're going to explore with you in the next 40-odd minutes. First of all, what is enterprise information management? What is this template that we've prepared for you? We'll share it with you, give you an overview of what that is. Secondly, how does information architecture and EIM work together? They're not really separate. You can't really do one without the other. If you're looking for an information or a data and analytics strategy, you will need to use some tools and techniques from information architecture. We'll explore that in the second section. And the final section, go through some of the deliverables. There are some great toolkits, specifically some additional frameworks that you can use, and we list them literally at the end of the presentation, so you can download them and hopefully take them away and take advantage of some of the tips and tricks we're sharing with you today. So let's look at the EIM framework first of all. This is a graphic you've probably seen a couple of times already. You may see it once or twice through the rest of the day or so left of this summit. This is nothing special, by the way. To be honest, we stole this from our CRM research team about 12 years ago. Our CRM team, Customer Relationship Management Group, were working with organizations that were going through severe change. They were struggling to establish business-relevant initiatives around customer orientation. And they developed if you will, the 7 steps to heaven. They came up with a framework that allowed customers to figure out the things they always had to do to make sure the initiative was successful. And so we looked at that program and we stole it, as all good analysts do, and we adopted it for information. And so what you see here in front of you are the 7 building blocks. We find that every successful implementation, every successful MDM case study, every successful governance initiative, every successful business intelligence program, every successful records management program, if you speak to the organization, they normally tell you they have a vision that tied to some kind of business goal, business focus. They had a strategy that looked at the scoping question. You know, how big is this thing? What's in scope versus what's out of scope? They'll often say we were very business relevant. We had specific metrics that we were able to measure success or failure by, something really measurable and demonstrable. They often talked about governance. They may not have mentioned the word governance. They may have talked about stewardship or marshalling, which is a popular word at the summit this week. But certainly they talked about ownership and policy enforcement and so on and so forth. Oftentimes they talk about roles, leadership, organizational structures, so another common characteristic of success. And then they often talk about the information lifecycle. I heard this a couple of times at the summit, companies saying how successful they've been in monitoring and designing the flow of data across the business systems. Literally, data has a life cycle. Not product lifecycle management, but data has a life cycle. Not storage, but data has a life cycle. It's born, it's young, it's fresh, it's innocent, and then it gets a snotty nose and we copy it everywhere, then it becomes a troublemaker. And then we replicate it, then we abuse it in a nice kind of way, and then we archive it, and data dies, right? We keep it in an archive just in case we use it later. So data has a life cycle, and organizations typically talk about that, and they're very successful in their initiative when they do. And last, technology. The 7th building block is technology, which is a hint. 6/7 of the framework have nothing or little to do with technology. We still have to be aware of technology when we talk about the strategy in the program, but it is not the driver, it's not the primary focus. It might be a constraint or it might be an opportunity, but it is not the primary driver. So that's the Enterprise Information Management Framework.
And when we talk about this being a better together relationship, this is what we mean. we see from this picture here, you see on one side the enterprise architecture landscape. And notice I said enterprise architecture landscape. We believe, based on what we see from leading organizations around the world, that successful information architecture resides within enterprise architecture. Why is that? Well, it's because we need to have context behind the business outcomes that we're generating. Business architecture provides us that context. It provides us those essential value streams that information is going to provide value around. It's going to identify those future state capabilities that we want to create and manage information assets around. And so what you see here is EA and information architecture connecting with various building blocks within the EIM framework. Each aspect of enterprise architecture has a very specific role to play. Now, it just so happens information architecture plays the largest role. And likewise with the EIM framework, technology comes last. It's about the business outcomes that you're trying to enable. So starting there with vision, information architecture helps in several ways. So when we're looking at creating and understanding our information vision, information architects will help facilitate the conversations with our business unit and IT leadership. And I'm being very deliberate with my language when I say facilitate. We are the business. There is no such thing as the business. We all have a role to play within the broader ecosystem. The information architect is responsible for figuring out what information assets will realize our future state vision. Second, the information architect will truly look at information as an asset and treat it as such, and create information portfolios that we evaluate, where we're going to profile this information, provide the benefits and the monetization models around that information, and create the risk models to protect the organization. Information architects, along with enterprise architects, are on the front line of defense for evaluating new and disruptive trends. These trends could be technology trends. These could be political, social, ethical, legal, regulatory issues. The architects are creating the blueprint for what our information should look like in the future, not necessarily our current state view. They will also help us understand, our senior leaders especially, understand what information is supporting their key imperatives. This is very important for us to help support the decision-making process. So information architects are commonly involved in the IT and business level strategy. And lastly, risk management is a very large component of the information architecture landscape. And what the information architects will do, they will help information managers understand what will be the future risks and create those predictive models. Now, when we talk about business outcome statements, this is what we're talking about. Now, if any of you went to business school, business outcome statements is just another term for things that you would use, such as maybe a Hoshin plan or a balanced scorecard. All a business outcome statement is a highly quantifiable and qualifiable statement that will identify these 4 things, or 5 things, should I say. A statement of your business direction, a statement of the disruptions that you're going to address, the specific concerns, and these concerns could be soft and tangible concerns, or they could be very concrete and tangible concerns. We're going to identify key strategic goals and make sure that those are aligned. And lastly, we're going to create a model. What is that information strategy for our business? So in the next building block, so once we have a vision and we understand the direction we want to take our organization, we have to create a plan. Remember, a strategy is just a plan. And strategies can be applied at many different levels. In this case, we're talking about an information strategy, not necessarily the broad corporate strategy. So the information architect is going to help us define the blueprint for which the information managers, the data scientists, the DBAs, that they're going to implement. To keep it very simple, the information architect is focused on what is the company's information assets and the plan around those. But the detailed execution on how we're going to do that, are we going to build a big data environment and create a data lake? Are we going to use traditional methods and use a data reservoir? Typically, that's the data architects and the information managers, DBAs, et cetera. However, the information architect is creating that blueprint, that design for them. Second, they're going to be able to crisply define the objectives, essentially help prioritize this for our executives. There's going to be input on scoping of the EIM program. Now remember, this isn't just the information architect's job to prioritize and scope EIM. This, again, is a collaborative effort. However, in most instances, the information architect is the facilitator. Again, that term, facilitator. They're going to create a partnership model with not only your business leaders, but also your technology leaders. And I'm being very specific with my language when I say partnership model. We're not trying to align with anybody. If we're aligning, that's predicating that we weren't aligned to begin with. We don't want to be in that business. We want to be in the partnership business. And we want to provide impact appraisals. So when business leaders ask us to go down a particular direction, we can provide them with the vital information to support their decision-making processes. We can articulate the implications to our business long-term. This is an example of one of the key deliverables in which an information architect would build to help create that strategy. So we've got a very colorful picture here. What you see in front of you is a business capability model. How many of you have heard of a business capability model? Okay, quite a few of you. Good. So this business capability model, what you can see on a page is a very powerful tool. I can look at a glance, all those red boxes, those are the most important things for my business. And more importantly, when I say the most important things for my business, I mean those are the most important things for my business over the next few years. So I'm going to want to focus on those as an information architect and scope my EIM program according to what is important now. Now, there's some other things that we can glean off of this capability model. We can understand where are the hot spots as far as information sensitivity. We can look at, based on the solutions we're trying to create, what is the level of business impact? This has given us our North Star to figure out how to scope what we do going forward. What are all the roadblocks? What are all the inhibitors that we need to keep an eye out for? When we look at our compliance issues, really the only people in the company that can truly say no to us, we can get in front of that. Just with this one visual, very powerful.
So at the end of the day, in terms of strategy, we have to produce something. So this is another toolkit we provide. It's called this Strategy Cookbook. I have no idea how editing allowed us to publish a note with the word cookbook in it, but we did. The Information Strategy Cookbook. We get to see a lot of strategy documents. Customers send in for review their strategy guides, and they ask us to comment on them and give feedback and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, many of them are 200 pages long. Now, most of the time, as you can tell from my accent, I'm actually working in Atlanta, where I live, in my shorts and T-shirt, reading these 250-page documents, and I can tell you it's not fun. I don't know how many documents you read that are 200 pages long, maybe a good book, but that's hardly an information strategy document, is it? So what we've tried to do with the cookbook is look at the best strategies we've seen and identify the components that go into that recipe, hence the cookbook. This is a picture of part of that cookbook. I won't go through the details because it's listed at the end, one of the toolkits. But the idea is we want to get to the phrase is a one-page strategy, right? If you go to the CIO forums, we talk about a one-page strategy. The reality is for information and analytics, it's probably 2 to 3 pages, maximum. But it should talk about the scoping thing, talk about the business capabilities and the priorities. It should have reference to the primary outcome we're satisfying. It will talk about major impediments like organizational barriers or leadership challenges or critical risks that will prevent us from being successful. These are the big things we want to document in the strategy. So we want to help you focus on something that's small, nimble, readable, consumable, understandable, and how many other words can I say that end in able? You know, it's got to be something that's usable for everybody, and it should be a document that doesn't live on the shelf and collect dust, but it's a document that actually influences decision making. So other folks in the IT organization use this to guide what are we going to do? Where do we spend our money? What's the next task based on the scoping and the priorities captured in the strategy document? The next part of the building blocks is metrics. Now, quick story. When we first published this thing 12 years ago, metrics was 6th of 7. Metrics was just above technology. And after a year and a half of publication, we were working with customers and looking at their EIM documents and their EIM strategies. And there was a complete vacancy in terms of the business metric. And when we asked those organizations that were using the research, they said, well, we looked at the 7 building blocks and we saw metrics down at the bottom, so we thought it wasn't very important, so we just focused on the top stuff. And it's like, no, crumbs, how can you have a strategy that doesn't talk about outcomes? So we redid the graph, the picture, with metrics 3rd on the list. So it's a subtle hint that it's really important. So the metrics building block is all about the business case, the business value. It's not necessarily really about data quality. So we much rather talk about the primary outcome, the measurable outcome. That's really the trigger point for the metrics building block. The way I like to talk about it is this graphic. You know, if I present a couple of times at this summit, I probably always sneak this slide in because it's one of my favorite ones. Not because of the colors necessarily, but this is a really useful graphic to convey the idea that we'd much rather not talk about data. You know, we talk about master data management, but we don't actually start by talking about data. We're talking about business process outcomes, or other outcomes maybe, not necessarily financial. We talk about what are we trying to achieve for the company. And we'd like to decompose that outcome to look at the business process KPIs, look at the way workflows are monitored, and then at the bottom, look at data quality. So we don't want to start the conversation around data because that tends to be not very relevant to the business folks. We want to focus on their outcomes that they're going to get measured by, that they're going to reward themselves and get a bonus if they achieve it. And we can use that to decompose and figure out the data that goes into those workflows, those processes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bit like the head bone connected to the neck bone, connected to the knee bone thing, right? It's all connected. Start at the top and work your way down rather than work up. And the other point about this graphic is if you do this once, if you start with a real priority at the top, you work down through this sort of hierarchy and you discover 17 attributes somewhere in our information systems that drive this outcome, the next question is, where is that data reused? Where are those 7 attributes reused? Because it's likely they're going to be used somewhere else, another metric. So if you were to start governing that data, you start to get a bang for your buck, as it were, because you're now getting synergy and you're possibly bringing in other stakeholders, other metrics, and helping other parts of the organization. So it's a series of iterative explorations going up and down the pyramid to explore first outcome, find out the data, find out where that data is reused, and so on and so forth.
So let's talk about business outcome statements. So at the very top of this pyramid, there we go. Yep. All right, we're back. We had to take a quick break here. All right, so business outcome statements. So at the very top of that pyramid, business outcome statements really drive everything else. It gives us the essential context for everything else. You might be wondering, well, okay, Mike and Andrew, what the heck do you mean by that? Well, this is what we mean by that. And I'm going to decompose this slide for you. First, we have to look at the trigger. Why are we talking about this business outcome statement? That's the business disruption. The business disruption could be many different things. How many of you have heard of pestle analysis? Nobody, or one. I would highly recommend looking at pestle analysis: political, ethical, social, technical, legal, and I forget what the E stands for at the moment. But it's giving you a fully rounded view of all the triggers that are going to affect your business. Information architects will analyze those in concert and partnership with your business partners. So once we identify those key disruptions that our business cares about, again, we're looking for relevancy here. We don't want to just do a blanket assessment of our entire data landscape because we want to focus on what's important now. We then want to understand what are the target outcomes. Now, what you'll notice about this statement is it's highly quantifiable and qualifiable. What we're looking for here. The easy test is the Mad Libs test. How many of you are familiar with Mad Libs? Yeah. If you can insert a word, another word, you've got a problem. So here we're saying the German government will invest 100 million euro into renewable energy initiatives. And as an energy company, we're really worried about that. What are we going to do? So the business outcome statement is we're going to capture 25% of the wind power generation in 36 months. We've got a very clear direction on what we want to do with that statement. Now, the last column, you'll see the level of impact. So if you're familiar with paced layering, you'll know that there's 3 key categories: things that run our business, things that grow our business, and things that transform our business. We want to categorize these business outcome statements accordingly. Why? Because our information strategies will treat each one of those categories differently. In the transform area, most likely that will fit within our bimodal strategy, and that'll be in a mode 2 type of environment. Versus our run and grow will be in our mode 1 environment. So it's important for us to categorize these because we will choose to invest in these business outcomes differently. We may be more aggressive in our information strategy on the transform capabilities versus the run and grow. Now keep in mind, as Andrew mentioned earlier, everything has a life cycle. And what was run yesterday might be transformed tomorrow. So when it comes to governance, the big evil word governance, what information architecture is going to do to help here is essentially provide the enablement component to governance, the self-serve component. And it's not only going to be in the form of reusable patterns and policies, but we also want to be able to provide prioritization. So when we come up with those business outcome statements and we create those strategies, we can provide the essential roadmap to our IT environment instead of them coming to us and being a reactive activity. We want this to be a proactive activity. Information architects are also going to facilitate the architecture trade-off analysis. Go through the process of understanding, based on the benefits that this initiative is going to provide and the risks that it incurs, how will we react as a business? Create architecture trade-off documents, etc. And lastly, they're going to identify key information patterns and reference architectures. So you'll typically find, coming from enterprise architects or information architects, libraries of proven practices, whether it be a business information model that gives us our blueprint for our organization, or data classification models, or data zoning models, that again helps enable proactive development within our organizations. We want to try to eliminate the traffic cop behavior, slapping people on wrists, coming after people. Successful and leading information architects are in the enablement business, not in the policing business. One of the ways we can drive a fact-based conversation is by understanding where our initiatives fall on this continuum. Based on the information that it leverages, we could use this simple 2x2, this business value matrix, to understand, based on the opportunity value of this initiative and the level of risk appetite, how should we govern this initiative? Now, you might notice I said level of risk appetite. I didn't say level of risk. What you'll find, if we rewind all the way back to that business capability model, you will find each capability in your business isn't created equally. And there will be different risk tolerance levels for each capability within your organization. We don't want to use the same framework for everything. We want to make our practices fit for purpose based on value of the organization, partnering with our business leaders to figure out what is that level of risk appetite. So when you have a model like this, you might say, we're going to take the Nike approach for the high value and high risk appetite items, meaning that it's fairly not risky. It's not risky at all. We're going to do the Nike slogan, just go do it. Now, for the areas where we have a low tolerance to risk and it's high value, we're going to work really hard to get those initiatives out of that quadrant and move it out. So we will tailor our governance based on where you sit on this continuum. Now, keep in mind, this is one tool of many that information architects will use. This is just an illustrative example of one of the key tools that they will use.
So if we think about the organization, we're moving our way down through the building blocks. We've got to think of change, and there are some things that are new. There are some new skills that we need to retool for. You've heard already discussions around stewardship, which is, I think, a very important word at the moment, an important role. So we need to make sure we're addressing the right gaps in skills and organizational structures to help ensure our programs are successful. In the organizational section, you've seen a lot of focus on Chief Data Officer. Some of you might actually be attending the special virtual Chief Data Officer track as part of our conference, our summit. So the Chief Data Officer is really the latest attempt at putting a laser-like focus on information as an asset. For some organizations, the discussion around what the CDO is leading, some organizations say, I have a CIO doing this already. So is the CIO the CDO? The answer is yes. It doesn't actually matter the label, but some organizations are using the opportunity to refocus and put the relevant roles and responsibilities under one hat. And so Chief Data Officer is that opportunity for you. And under that hat, we put everything to do with strategy, governance, information risk, information security, innovation, monetization, governance, and MDM, those kinds of things. Nothing to do with technology. Nothing to do with technology. No acquisition, no responsibility for delivery. Ooh, that sounds good. Not actually delivering per se, right? Because that requires other participants. So there's obviously a close collaboration between the office of the CDO and the office of the CIO, but the CDO is responsible for the strategy. It typically is a business person. Most CDOs come from the business side, not from the IT side. Not all of them, but many of them do, the majority of them. Some of them, by the way, do have technology responsibility. So it's not as if it's a mandatory thou shalt not, but there seems to be the common pattern that you're business-oriented and you're not focused on the technology side of the house. You see on the left-hand or the right side of the chart in front of you the other roles that may report into the CDO. So you heard in the panel, you heard in some of the other presentations, some organizations have a single solitary person and they're diligently developing a strategy. Other organizations have a large office, a number of people either directly reporting to the CDO or virtually reporting to the CDO. So the key is that there needs to be a single focal point, ideally as high up as possible and probably board level. At the end of the day, we really want to be business and high level so that we're tapping into the business direction rather than the technology direction. And You know, I've been at Gartner for about 14 years now, and I remember when MDM got going, man, that was exciting, right? It was, now we say MDM's not so sexy. I think MDM still is a bit sexy, but, you know, it was exciting to see MDM get going and all of us, you know, learn something about data. Well, I think CDO is that kind of excitement. It's gonna persist, it's gonna be around. We're tracking about 1,200 CDOs right now. We're expecting 2,000 or so by the end of the year. So it's growing dramatically, and we think it's a really good way to focus on strategy and innovation and so on and so forth. We think of information lifecycle. This particular building block is probably the stepchild of EIM. If you look at our research, we haven't actually written quite as much as we'd like on information lifecycle, which is interesting because it might be a reflection of the questions we get from folks like yourselves. But it's a very, very important conversation, and the reality is it's not that complicated. So we do have some tools and toolkits to help you, but it's all about discovering and documenting both the current flow of information across our business systems and as well as the future target states. So a discussion of the information lifecycle identifies a number of things from the stakeholders, who touches it, what the quality is, which business rules are touching the data, which applications are using it, where does the data go, et cetera, et cetera. So the information lifecycle is extremely important, a critical component of the EIM framework. And to help prioritize that, we talk about the 3 rings of information governance. This is a chart I drew yesterday in a presentation, and I don't have many jokes, by the way. I'm not a very good joke teller, but I actually said that it took me 5 years to draw this picture. And that wasn't a joke yesterday, but somebody thought it was quite funny. But the idea is, you know, we get to go out sometimes if we're well behaved and we get to visit companies like yourselves. And I watched companies discover the contention in data. They would often discover how the same piece of information is used in multiple applications and how each application had its own rule for what that attribute should be. And if you think of these 3 rings representing 3 large applications, say ERP, CRM, and say e-commerce or something, and think of product data or customer data or supplier data or people data, and think of the attributes describing those objects and figure out where those attributes are used. How many attributes describing product are in all 3 application suites? That's the data in the middle of the 3 rings. That's your master data. The other stuff is not master data because it's not widely referenced. If it's locally referenced in the ERP system, that's local data management. The governance is local to the single app because nobody else cares about it. So discovering the life cycle, where does data flow? How many copies do you need? How many applications are seeking ownership of the policy? That's how you get the governance thing sorted out. That's how you get the MDM thing sorted out. And it's all from a discovery of the life cycle of the information flowing through the systems. Finally, we have technology. There's a lot going on in technology, of course. There's a lot of innovation going on in technology. But what we'd like to do is think of a way, and we hopefully have found a way to help modernize the information infrastructure. We believe that many organizations are struggling with the whole big data thing, and IoT is coming along now, and it's going to blow everything up, right? IoT is going to dwarf big data hugely. So information infrastructures are not really well designed to take account of the situation. It's getting worse, more complicated. So we've come up with a framework, the Information Capabilities Framework, which is a way to consider how to govern and select your technology so that you shift away from a discussion of vendors and tools, each project at a time, and focus on reusable capability. So if you think of your MDM journey, which is just one of the many journeys we're on, some of you report that you have an MDM solution in one part of the business for customer data, and you may have a different MDM strategy and solution for product data or supplier data. Different tooling, different vendors, different contracts, different maintenance, same kind of capabilities, right? Data modeling, workflow, data quality, dashboard, bit of analytics, all thrown in, right? Because we typically associate, you know, each vendor or solution at a project time. We go and source them one at a time, and we don't have the ability really to figure out how to reuse them. So the Information Capabilities Framework is a whole body of research to try to help move from that individual stovepipe approach to a more reusable framework. Some companies are finding that this is a great way to start the conversation. It's a long journey. You don't implement the ICF, you adopt it as a technique to start to rationalize your complicated technology stack. So wrapping up the session, what we'd like to suggest that maybe focus on outcomes. You know, we moved metrics building block from 6th up to 3rd, but of all of the building blocks in the EIM framework and the information architecture, the outcome is number 1. That's sort of like the most important thing we'd like to leave with you, both at the summit as well as this particular presentation. I described the situation going down that pyramid where you start with an outcome in mind, you figure out the data that's, you know, the source of that, and then maybe think about where that data is reused in a series of iterative cycles. That's leverage. And of course, you know, you all have, you know, projects in flight, right? You've got a lot of IT initiatives, you've got lots of work ahead of you. You can't wait to get back to the office on Monday, right? We've got to start somewhere. So hopefully that iterative approach can help you start somewhere, find some data, and then reuse it to gradually grow the scope of your EIM program. You never implement it as a big bang. It's always a think big but start small approach.
Now, third, we don't want to lead with architecture either. Remember, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So, starting with those business outcomes are critical. Using the fit-for-purpose architectural styles for the problems you're trying to solve are essential. So when we look at that information capability view, that is one way to abstract out that technical detail. So start with the business problem you're trying to solve and use the appropriate architectural style. Maybe it's big data. Maybe it's a traditional ODS. Maybe it's a dynamic ontology. It will depend on the problems you're trying to solve. So don't look for that silver bullet. It still doesn't exist. Exploit the best practices. So this presentation is a great example of that. Think of this presentation as a launch pad. Believe it or not, this presentation, which is 20-something slides, is based on a broader playbook that we just published a couple weeks ago. I think it has, what, some 50 or some odd slides that gives you the atlas for how information architecture will intersect and help enable EIM. Now, even with that 50-some-odd slide presentation that we've published, that playbook, there are links to other research. We could probably have created a 300-slide presentation for you. But we want to give you the ability to see the forest through the trees, give you that broad playbook on how information architecture will enable EIM. So with that, thank you very much.